Number 10. The Bombastic Bagman. Amazing Spider-Man number 258 is an important issue in the character's history. It is the issue where Mary Jane admits that she knows that Spider-Man's secret identity is Peter Parker. It's the issue where the black symbiote suit causes Peter to have his iconic nightmare. And it's the issue where Spider-Man takes his black suit to the Fantastic Four for analysis and discovers that it is a living alien symbiote. More important for the purposes of this list, it's also the comic that features one of the most beloved Spider-Man looks. Once Peter discovers the black suit's true origin, he tries to take it off, but it refuses to be removed, and Mr. Fantastic is forced to use a sonic weapon to get it off of Spidey. This leaves Peter with no way to conceal his secret identity. Johnny Storm is happy to help him out, lending him an old Fantastic Four costume and a paper bag with holes punched into it for a mask. Spidey heads home, embarrassed at his appearance, but is forced to stop a robbery in his temporary costume. Both the victims, the criminals, and the police are confused at this strange figure with a "kick me" sign taped to his back, and once the crime scene is secured, the Bagman is swarmed by reporters who ask him who he is and if he is dressed like he is as some kind of superhero initiation prank. All in all, one of the more embarrassing ways that Peter has had to hide his secret identity. Number 9. Batman spreads misinformation. After Bruce Wayne returned from being trapped in time, don't ask, he decided that his efforts to fight crime had been too small in scale. So, he decided to take his crime-fighting enterprise to a global level. As Bruce Wayne, he announced publicly that he had been funding Batman's exploits for years and was starting and funding an organization that was going to franchise the idea of Batman so that every country would get its own Batman. He called it Batman Incorporated. Bruce coming out and admitting that he is linked to Batman, of course, led to more people theorizing that the eccentric billionaire might actually be the Dark Knight. Batman, of course, anticipated this and began posting anonymously on internet message boards. In response to a post saying that Bruce Wayne is obviously Batman, Batman posted, "Wrong, wrong, wrong. Bruce Wayne is dead, and this man on TV has completely different body language and posture. Batman has taken control of Bruce Wayne's life and fortune." When questioned about this method, Bruce responds, "Attempts will shortly be made to expose the secret identities of Batman and his allies. When they happen, they'll be lost in a blizzard of rumor, denial, and misinformation. Just one more crackpot conspiracy theory among 1,000 others." So, Batman apparently founded both Batman Incorporated and QAnon in one day. Number 8. Superman's glasses. The granddaddy of them all. The most infamously bad way to hide a secret identity. Clark Kent being able to throw off suspicion of him being Superman by simply wearing a pair of glasses. Of course, it's not just that. He's also changing his entire personality and demeanor to avoid suspicion, and most people don't consider that Superman would even have a secret identity and they aren't looking. Of course, this is still kinda silly, and this issue is addressed in Superman number 330. In this comic, Clark has a nightmare where all of his friends reveal that they know he's Superman and have just been humoring him. He wakes up and considers if maybe his disguise is kind of weak. He looks at himself in the mirror and thinks to himself, "Now that I stop to think about it, that's the dumbest disguise I've ever seen. What, am I supposed to look like a totally different person? I just look like Superman wearing glasses. I mean, what else should I expect? Ordinary people start wearing glasses. Do their friends say, 'Who are you?' No, they say, 'Oh, you got glasses.'" He wonders how his identity has managed to stay a secret until Lana Lang walks in on him changing and asks him why he's wearing glasses. He responds that he's disguising himself as Clark Kent, and Lana says that that is a terrible disguise as he looks nothing like Clark. This confuses him even more until he realizes that he is really using his super hypnosis power. You see, back in the day, Superman had the ability to hypnotize people with his mind, and his glasses, whose lens were made from the window of the starship he came to Earth in, amplified this ability, hypnotizing everyone into seeing Clark as a different person than Superman. This explanation isn't canon anymore, so he really is just fooling everyone with a pair of glasses, which is of course ridiculous. Number 7. Wolverine becomes Patch. When Wolverine and the X-Men were assumed dead following the Fall of the Mutants storyline, they wanted to keep it that way. So, when Wolverine was called to Madripoor to settle his debt to a dying man, he knew that he needed a clever disguise so no one would know it was him. His solution was to wear an eye patch and call himself Patch. Not exactly the most involved disguise. At least when Superman wears his glasses, he's putting on a different persona and changing his hairstyle and posture. But Wolverine doesn't even change his hair away from his classic look. He doesn't act any different from his usual self, he's just Wolverine in an eye patch. He developed this persona in 1988's Wolverine Volume 2 Issue 2, but has dusted it off from time to time, using it as one of his go-to disguises when he needs to keep a low profile. Of course, Wolverine typically wears a mask on his X-Men adventures, so the general public probably isn't overly familiar with his face, but it's still not a very clever disguise. Number 6. The Flash is always late. Barry Allen is of course one of the fastest men alive, being able to reach insane speeds so fast that he can travel back in time. He is a masked hero, so it's a bit easier for him to hide his identity, but in order to prevent people from being suspicious, he has developed a foolproof method of throwing people off of his scent. He never shows up on time for anything. The logic being that if he has super speed, surely he would be able to get to appointments on time. Of course, constantly showing up late for everything is more suspicious than if you just did it occasionally, and a better way to stop people from suspecting him would be to stop wearing a prominent ring with a lightning bolt on it on your finger, which makes people assume that Barry has some kind of link, possibly even an engagement, to the Flash. Number 5. Trench coats. You know, in Marvel movies, whenever anyone has to go undercover, they do so by wearing like a baseball cap and sunglasses? Well, the classic comics equivalent of this was the classic combo of a trench coat and a fedora, despite just making the person look like themselves in a trench coat. It remained a staple of comic books for years, with some notable examples being The Thing from the Fantastic Four, as well as it being the go-to disguise for the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. They still just look like giant turtles in trench coats. While we're on the subject, what is the point of the turtles wearing masks? Are there other giant mutant turtles that they might be confused for? Back on the subject of trench coat disguises, my favorite rendition of this trope is from Marvel's Godzilla King of the Monsters number 19, where Godzilla has been shrunk down and is running through the city. He needs a disguise, so he is put in a trench coat and hat, and it works until some thugs try to mug him and he throws off the disguise and attacks. Number 4. Daredevil's twin. When it comes to superheroes trying to protect their identities, few characters have had such a hard time of it as Matt Murdock, aka Daredevil. You'd think that being blind would throw people off the scent, and yet his identity has been leaked so many times it's almost a running joke that everyone knows who he is. One of Matt's earliest and strangest attempts to hide his life as Daredevil came in Daredevil issue 25, when Matt's friends, Foggy and Karen, found a letter from Spider-Man doxing Matt. They confronted him about the letter, and he was forced to think on his feet. He basically told them, no, I'm not Daredevil. That's my identical twin brother, who I've never mentioned before, Mike Murdock. Foggy and Karen of course do not believe this, as he has never mentioned Mike before, and they ask if they can meet him. Matt says sure, and later shows up in flashy clothes and a beatnik attitude, claiming to be Matt's twin, who is Daredevil and can totally see, despite the fact that he is always wearing sunglasses. Somehow this works, and Karen and Foggy never wonder why the two are never in the same room together. Matt continues this Mrs. Doubtfire style charade for the next 16 issues, before eventually faking Mike's death because he had accidentally created a love triangle with his fake twin and Karen. Number 3. Batman Who Laughs super brutal murder. When the Joker of Earth-22 found out that he was dying, he decided to go on one last spree in an attempt to send Batman over the edge. He took out all of the other supervillains in Gotham, as well as Jim Gordon. He blew up several buildings and captured Batman. He forced the Dark Knight to watch as he ended the lives of the parents of kidnapped children in front of them before infecting them with the Joker toxin. In order to stop the madness, Batman broke free and broke the Clown Prince's neck. When he did this, Batman was inadvertently exposed to a Joker toxin, which corrupted his mind and gave him the Joker's sick and twisted sense of humor and murderous desires. This Batman went on to kill the Bat family, as well as the entire Justice League, before using his evil cunning to take over and destroy his world. His methods of taking out his former teammates were all awful, but the most despicable of them has to be how he took out Superman and his family. He brought Superman, his son John, and Lois Lane together, and then exposed Clark and John to black kryptonite. This particular strain of kryptonite drives Kryptonians insane, and as a result, Clark and John ripped Lois apart before attacking each other, as the Batman Who Laughs watched their cruel and messy demise. Number 2. Rainbow Batman. In the classic Batman story featured in Detective Comics number 241, Dick Grayson witnesses a robbery and sees that the getaway car is about to hit a little girl. He pushes her out of the way, but hurts his arm in the process. His heroics make the news, and the whole of Gotham hears about his story. It comes to light that the criminals are planning another robbery, and because Dick witnessed the robbery, Batman needs him to come along as Robin to identify the crooks. The problem is that it is now a matter of public record that Dick Grayson has an injured injured arm. So, if people see Robin with a hurt arm, they might make the connection and discover their secret identities. Batman decides that in order to protect their identities, he will wear a different colored costume every day until they catch the criminals. His logic being that people will be so weirded out that they'll be staring at him and ignoring Robin. He goes through red, blue, yellow, orange, green, and even a white batsuit with a target on it before eventually taking out the criminals in a rainbow batsuit. The plan works and no one notices Robin's arm, but poor Alfred must have been exhausted making all those multicolored batsuits every night. Number 1. It's a bird. It's a plane. It's Superman, dressed as a bird. In the story The Private Life of Clark Kent, featured in Superman Family number 197, Clark gets home after a long day, only to discover that his neighbors have left him a mynah bird to take care of while they're away for the weekend. The bird keeps bothering Clark, saying quotes from classic movies that it picked up, and is now mimicking. The noise keeps him up for most of the night until he finally tunes her out and gets some sleep. The next day he wakes up and realizes that he was talking in his sleep because the bird keeps saying, Clark Kent is Superman. He tries to fix the issue by making a looped tape that says, Clark Kent is a super newsman, and leaving the bird alone, hoping that the bird will pick up the new phrase. Clark gets home and is met with, Clark Kent is Superman. He takes the bird to the Fortress of Solitude and waits for it to say his secret. And then, every time it does, he screams and leaps out in a giant bird costume to scare the mynah. He does this for an entire night until the bird is so traumatized that it refuses to tell the world that Clark Kent is Superman. Clark gets a call from his neighbors a couple days later asking why the bird doesn't say the phrase they spent weeks training her to say as a prank anymore. Clark realizes his mistake and the comic ends with him trying to retrain a traumatized bird to say that Clark Kent is Superman again.
Number 10. Kingpin's Mutant Prison. Some of the worst fates really do come from ruins, where it feels like everything is just awful for the sake of being awful, I guess. I mean, this series was made to sort of contrast the Marvels, and it does that admittedly, but it does that without really having anything else to say, it kind of feels like. When it comes to Quicksilver, he's seemingly still alive in this series, but honestly I can't imagine for much longer, which is how he's kind of making my list here. He ends up having his legs and arms removed because he's too fast, likely. However, Kingpin, his jailer here, claims this is actually done for, and I quote, Quickie's own good. Considering that it looks like it wasn't done very well, and that it looks like Quicksilver may even still be bleeding, possibly bleeding out at this point, I can't imagine he'll last too much longer, and honestly, what a terrible way to go. Honestly, just existing in ruins I feel like is a pretty terrible way to go, because if you exist in that world, you're probably already dead, or you're like on your way to dying. I mean, even the protagonist, the narrator we follow on this journey, Phil Sheldon, is. So yeah, and he's like the protagonist, so, or at least the narrator. I would say he's still the protagonist. He's still kind of the character we follow. And friends, before we move on to our next spot on this list, if you love what we do here at Top 10 Nerd, and if you love when we talk about pretty bleak things, be sure to let us know by clicking that like button. Number 9. Invisible Woman. Marvel Zombies really does have some of the most gruesome deaths, which is why I would never want to go there myself. This one at least was kind of going to a person that deserved it though, although I feel bad about saying that because I really do love this character, so like it's still sad that this happens in this reality. We are talking here about She-Hulk's death. I do love She-Hulk, although in this instance She-Hulk was already zombified and it kinda ate the kids of Susan Storm aka Invisible Woman and Reed Richards aka Mr. Fantastic in this universe, Valeria and Franklin. Weird thing is, you'd think Franklin would have been able to like fend her off with his reality warping powers, which I assumed he would also have in this universe, but hey, maybe on Earth 2149 Franklin didn't have powers, or you know, he was depowered prematurely. Either way, when Susan finds out that She-Hulk as a zombie has used her knowledge of the Baxter Building codes as someone who was once part of the Fantastic Four team to get in and then devour these two, she loses it and uses her power to create a force field and basically pop She-Hulk's head like a grape. It's insane to me how powerful Sue is. I mean, I guess at least it'd be quick, but yeah, Susan Storm's pretty wild. I would not want to be messed with by Susan Storm. Don't make her upset. Number 8. Torn to Shreds. This was a hard one to rank because while I feel like it would be really awful, I also still feel like there's somehow worse out there in the Marvel universe waiting for me. Were I a person? Gosh, that would be terrible. I would hope that I was a superhero. That's the best I can hope, really. Still, this kind of death is pretty much as bad as it gets. If we're speaking in general terms, then you know, straight up ranking it as one of the worst ways to die in the Marvel multiverse, which is kind of actually what we are doing here, but still, I digress. It's pretty pretty bad. Deadpool is one of the folks who has undergone this usually life-ending process multiple times. One such time actually happened when he faced off against Carnage, who actually made a pretty dramatic appearance on our part 2 for this series. Of course, Carnage would take this approach to fighting and probably also immensely enjoy it, which it makes it, I think, that much worse. Now, because this is Deadpool, he didn't die here because Deadpool. However, this wasn't even where everything ended for Deadpool, because Carnage also was plotting to burn down the building that this happened in. So Deadpool would have in theory been diced and then kind of flambéed. Number 7. Squip Grub Chulp. What does that mean? You're about to find out. Symbiotes are definitely some of the most frightening creatures we have in the Marvel Universe. Definitely would not want to be rescued by one. Sorry, Venom. But also would never want to be dubbed a criminal by one. For years, Venom had been threatening to eat people's brains, and guess what? It also became more than a threat at one point. Venom threatened to do this because the symbiote actually feeds on the happy chemicals that brains produce. So either it needs a host with a good supply of that, or one that basically snacks on chocolate a lot, which is why Eddie usually does that. Otherwise, it would literally have to find some brains to eat because it needs those chemicals, baby. Now, I'm pretty sure Venom has moved past this requirement in the modern day of comics right now, but it doesn't stop it from being a deeply disturbing thing that the symbiote did/needed to do to survive at one point. Also, for anyone who was wondering, the name of this point is the sounds that Venom made when, scarfing down some brains. So, ugh. Number 6. Microwaved. This one makes me very uncomfortable, but I'm gonna tell you about it anyways because that's my job, so that's what I gotta do right now. Even though, of course, it's in a Deadpool story, which I think is the only place you could get away with something like this at Marvel Comics. In the comic Deadpool Kills Deadpool, we head to the multiverse where Deadpool, a version of Deadpool anyways, is hunting down, well, other Deadpools. Like the title says, Deadpool kills Deadpool. That's what's happening here. Right at the beginning of the series in issue number 1, the sinister black-suited Deadpool ends up confronting his alternate zombified self, Headpool, who is of course also known as Deadpool though, but we're gonna call him Headpool for clarity's sake. Headpool hails from the Marvel zombie universe of Earth 2149, where the world was ravaged by zombies. This zombie though ended up making his way to Earth 616 before he was reduced to just being a head. So how does the evil Deadpool deal with him? Pretty easily and terribly by popping him in a microwave. Splat! Number 5. Devoured by spiders. What a way to go. I just love spooky, scary Spider-Man stories, and this one comes from another tale based in the Spider-Man multiverse. We are talking about the fate of Spiders-Man. Spiders-Man is like Spider-Man, but this Peter Parker, instead of becoming a man with spider-like powers, basically became spiders. Peter Parker in this case fell into a vat of experimental spiders who devoured him completely. However, because science, they also ended up taking on his consciousness, which survived his physical death, with the spiders becoming kind of like a new version of that character. The hero Spiders-Man, who is entirely made up of spiders, and who also kind of goes on to become a villain, but that's a story for another time. Now, I personally am not too bothered by spiders in my everyday life, but I also feel like I've never dealt with, a whole vat of hungry spiders who wanted to eat me. So on paper, this one remains pretty terrifying to me, even though I'm usually pretty cool with spiders. Number 4. The Needy Revenge. On our part 1, we talked about the tragic and disrespectful death of Janet Van Dyne in the Ultimate Universe, aka the Wasp, but at least we can say she was avenged. Or we could say that if this avenging wasn't so terrible. I don't know if we can quite say that because it's pretty terrible what happens here. When Hank Pym, aka Giant Man, aka Ant-Man, finds out that not only is Janet dead, but that the Blob also desecrated her corpse by, eating her, he decides to get revenge by doing the same to Blob. But while he is still alive, because Ultimate Universe, Hank grows to his giant size and then picks Blob up and basically bites off his head. Although at least I guess he doesn't eat him, he instead, spits Blob's head out, but still the whole scene is not saved from being insanely awful, I'd say, and this is still not a way that I personally would want to go. Honestly, facing a giant being just seems like a bad way to go in general. I don't like that idea. I don't like things that are gigantic. It makes me uncomfortable. If you're not eaten, you're still likely getting squashed, and that's just a yikes to me. I don't want someone to step on me. That's no thank you. Number 3. Sinking with your best pal. Possibly one of the worst ways I can imagine going just in general. Whether we're talking about comic books or real life, this way is pretty bad. Even just based on the circumstances here, the way that Captain Kate Pride went is just really sad too. She went down with a ship, drowned, which many have said is actually one of the most painful ways to go. And what made her death even worse was that she believed one of her best friends, her pal Lockheed, also perished with her. This happened when Sebastian Shaw attempted to remove Kate from the Hellfire Trading Company, which she sat on the board of as their Red Queen, by, well, I mean drowning her, killing her. You know. Number 2. Starvation and isolation. This one comes to us from Magneto, who saw this as a fair punishment to dole out to Red Skull, based on his treatment of other humans during World War II when he was obviously allied with Germany in the Third Reich. Magneto in essence took Red Skull to an isolated underground bunker, leaving him trapped there without any way out as the door was locked and located on the roof of the bunker. Red Skull was left with no ladder and only some water to basically keep him company, which he'd have to ration in order to prolong his survival, although obviously I don't think Magneto really intended him to survive. During his time trapped here, he began to hallucinate and started to lose his mind as starvation set in. I think this is possibly one of the worst ways to go in general, so once again, Magneto takes one of our top spots. Basically, don't upset Magneto. Just don't do that. Number 1. Carnage. I'd like to thank Fireball Earth for this terrifying and very true suggestion, so thank you from the comments. This is such a good point. Carnage is so frightening. Carnage is definitely one of the worst ways to go in the Marvel Universe. With Carnage, you not only have to deal with having your life ended by a symbiote, which honestly, like I said, is terrifying enough, but you also have to deal with Cletus Cassidy, who is the other part of Carnage. Carnage is one entity made up of 2, serial killer Cletus Cassidy and his soulmate, the alien symbiote offspring of Venom, who we often name Carnage, but technically Carnage is the entity of both of them together. Anyways, this symbiote is actually Venom's first child, who quickly became known as one of the most cruel and deadly out there, largely due to their connection to Cletus. I've seen what Carnage does when he has a whole town full of people to play with in Carnage USA, when the villain took control of an entire town, and it is definitely not pretty. Hands down, it's one of the most frightening Carnage stories I've ever read, so I would not want to be part of that at all. No thank you. Number 10. Mark of Cain. Of the most gruesome ways to go, I think one of the worst would be to get Mark of Cained. Cain marked? I don't know if that's really how we say that, but sure. We can say it either of those ways for now, because I don't know what else to call that. Kane Parker is a clone of Peter Parker, of the 2 main clones we know from the Clone Saga. He was the one who was actually more dramatic and broody. He had long hair and for a while was more of an antagonist, or at least believed to be so. Kane was also known for straight up killing people that got in his way, with his Mark of Cain. What is the Mark of Cain? While initially we kind of thought it was like its own ability, it's actually just Peter's like little hooks that he has on his hands which allow him to stick to stuff, which we actually see in the Raimi-verse pretty close up. Kane would basically put his hand on someone's face and then turn on this sticky ability, which resulted in him seemingly burning the face of his victim. I mean, I don't know if this would actually kill you, but I feel like if this was at all involved in the process of Kane killing me, I would not be interested in that at all. Unless I guess I was already dead. Then I guess I'd kind of be fine with it, because I'd be like, well, I'm not here to feel that, so cool. And friends, before we move on to our next spot on this list, if you love what we do here at Top 10 Nerd, why not show us you love us by clicking that subscribe? I know there's a lot of you out there that aren't subscribed, and if you're already subscribed, let me know in the comments.
Number 9. Man-Thing. In 1971, Marvel introduced Man-Thing. He was a scientist named Ted Sallis trying to create his own version of the super soldier serum before being attacked by criminals who wanted to steal his work. To keep the formula secret, Ted injected himself with the serum before getting in a car accident that caused his car to crash into a magic swamp. The serum and the magic caused him to transform into a big green swamp monster who was able to control plant life as well as a host of other abilities. One of his powers is to sense human emotion, with him having different reactions to different feelings. Fear sends Man-Thing into a fit of rage, and when he senses it, his body automatically secretes a corrosive acid-like agent that will burn anyone he touches. Hence the series tagline, "Whatever knows fear burns at the Man-Thing's touch." Now, I don't know about you, but if I came across a creature like Man-Thing, it would be difficult not to be afraid. So I really don't know how well I would do, and the idea of being grabbed by such a beast and burned to death because he's mad that I'm afraid sounds like a rough way to go.
Number 8. Driven mad by power. Another awful way to die, of course, coming to us from runes, is the fate of Silver Surfer. Silver Surfer dies as a result of what they believe to be a sort of superhero madness. In essence, it's believed that Silver Surfer missed the feeling of breathing air for some reason, being unable to as he was, traveling in the vacuum of space without, of course, needing to breathe. However, this was the very time when he decided, hey, you know what? I'd love to breathe right now even though there's no air around me. Not a great time considering, yeah, there's no oxygen there, you're just floating around in the space between stars and planets. However, Silver Surfer is believed to have basically torn himself apart, clawing at himself until his lungs were exposed, and of course, despite having the power cosmic, he died. It's believed he died from the shock of the cold. I mean, honestly, what a way to go. Become so crazed that you think tearing yourself apart so you can breathe while flying alone in outer space on a silver surfboard is a good idea, or is simply something you must do. I can't imagine that. Also, I love how it's like, I gotta breathe, like time to rip myself apart. Okay then.
Number 7. Absorbed by the Hulk. One of the most feared figures in the Marvel Universe for both hero and villain alike is the Incredible Hulk. Despite his reputation as a giant raging green monster, the Hulk goes out of his way to not be responsible for the deaths of any of the civilians or villains that he has to fight while rampaging through the world. Despite this, it does happen from time to time. In the Ultimate Universe, the Hulk is known for eating people, which is of course a terrible way to go, and getting smashed by the Jade Giant would of course be a horrible experience, but I think the worst way that you could meet your end at the hands of the Hulk is the way featured in Immortal Hulk number 8. In this issue, the Hulk has been captured by a secretive Black Ops organization called Shadow Base. In order to prevent the Hulk from escaping, they have vivisected him into multiple pieces which they keep in separate jars, in order to prevent his healing factor from allowing him to come together and escape. The evil Dr. Clive, who is in charge of the program, is running various cruel experiments on the Hulk in order to fully understand the power of his healing factor. Little did Clive know, he was doing exactly what the Hulk wanted him to. He wanted Clive to run the experiments so that he could learn more about himself, and once he knew what he needed, he controlled his hand in one of the jars to snap its fingers, creating a shockwave that shattered the jars, allowing Hulk's various parts to reform and heal. Hulk took Dr. Clive's treatment personally, and as he reformed, he absorbed the Doctor into himself, causing the Doctor to be smothered by the Hulk's innards as he desperately begged for mercy that wasn't coming. It is a fitting end for such a character, but it's not a fate I would want to endure while living in the Marvel Universe.
Number 6. Ripped in half. Being ripped in half really does not seem fun, and yet for some reason this is a very common way to die when it comes to Marvel Comics. I can't count how many times someone has been ripped in half. I literally can't, because every time I attempt to, I actually think of another occurrence of this happening, and then I have to start all over again. So it's very hard for me to put a number on that one. It's terrible. Or, you know, maybe it's just comics. The one thing I'd really warn against, you know, if you're looking out from us at the Marvel Multiverse, is that while living in whatever world you are in, you should basically never do this to another person, be they villain or hero, regardless of your alignment or their alignment. Just don't do it. I've seen this kind of could basically come back to haunt characters who generally also get torn in half by someone else as some kind of like karmic payback, so if you've done it to someone, it's probably coming for you.
Number 5. The U-Men. The mutants of the Marvel Universe have had a pretty rough go of it, being subjected to many atrocities due to the prejudices of the humans that despise them. Usually the humans are convinced that the mutants are dangerous and desire their extermination, so they can take their place as the next step in evolution, which makes the humans try to exterminate them first. Other comics explore how the mutant hate doesn't really make a lot of sense, as the humans will praise the superpowered beings until they find out that they're mutants, at which point they will turn against them. However, some of the humans hate the mutants out of sheer jealousy. For example, the Homo Perfectus movement, which are humans who believe that they are mutants stuck in human bodies and wish to undergo surgery to empower themselves with mutant powers. There was a cult-like faction of the group called the U-Men who swore against ever having contact with the impure world until they had had their powers, and wore containment suits until they could be transformed. The way the U-Men went about this was by traveling the country and capturing mutants who they would then harvest organs and body parts from in order to empower their members. Life for mutants is hard enough, but being captured by an insane cult with a military budget who want to dissect you and steal your body parts in a crazy quest to steal your powers is one of the worst, as it is a painful and demeaning way to go, as in the words of their leader, John Sublime, to them, mutants are just livestock.
Number 4. Daken. What's worse than being livestock? Being Daken's livestock, I guess. If Wolverine is the best at what he does, Daken is the one who simply enjoys what he does a little too much. Daken is a trained killer, and we get to see this side of him on full display during his fight against the Punisher during Dark Reign. It was during this era of Marvel that we saw Norman Osborn take over as leader of the Avengers after S.H.I.E.L.D. was no more, and he was basically put in charge of his very own organization, which he named Hammer, an acronym that stands for or, well, nothing really. Osborn just liked the sound of it. During this time, working for Osborn, the Dark Avengers were given a list of targets for them to remove, them to get rid of. One such person on that list was Frank Castle. This death is also what we'd call overkill. Daken not only tears Frank apart and runs him through with his claws multiple times, but in the end, he also removes his head. Of course, Frank wouldn't straight up die, but instead would later return as the undead Frankencastle, but regardless, I still think this would be a terrible way to go.
Number 3. Superman gets caught on TV. In Action Comics number 345, Metropolis is being taken by storm by a new candid camera prank show. While picking their next target, they decide to prank the mild-mannered reporter for the Daily Planet, Clark Kent. Their prank is simple. While Clark is at the fair, they will pull a fake robbery. When Clark goes into a nearby phone booth to call the story in, he'll discover that the phone line is dead and he won't get his story. Hilarious! The prank is set up, and upon seeing the robbery, Clark goes into the phone booth. The TV host and his camera crew throw open the door to tell him he's been punked and are shocked to see Clark midway into changing into his Superman costume. They confront him, being like, "Clark, you're Superman," to which he replies, "Am I?" He then takes off his pants on live television, revealing that he is wearing Batman's pants, saying, "I could be Superman, or Batman, or plain Clark Kent. Take your choice." The prank show host realizes that he's being pranked, and Clark explains that he saw the broadcast on a pocket television and bought the costumes at a nearby shop to set up his prank. But what really happened was Superman heard the camera crew coming while he was changing, and rather than just closing his shirt, he drilled a hole through the floor, flew to Jimmy Olsen's place, took his pocket TV and the pants from his Batman costume, flew back to the phone booth, fixed the floor, and then let the camera crew catch him.
Number 2. Sabretooth. While Daken and the U-Men are both pretty terrible, if there was one person I wouldn't want to be killed by in the Marvel Universe, it would probably be Sabretooth. Victor Creed is probably one of the most vicious and evil characters we have in the Marvel Universe. Sure, he's done some heroic stuff before, mainly when his alignment was flipped or if we're talking about alternate realities, but this is a man who legitimately revels in violence usually. When he was sent to the pit in Krakoa as punishment, he used this time to kill all the X-Men and heroes he felt had ever slighted him. In his dreams, of course. This wasn't real, but it was still pretty brutal. And when that was done, he decided to create his own hell, and then plot his own escape, even double-crossing the prisoners that he had planned his escape with. Yeah, Creed has to be one of the worst ways to go, hands down.
Number 1. Deadpool's counter to the healing factor. On Earth 12,101, the X-Men grew tired of Deadpool's instability and insanity and had him committed to the Ravencroft Asylum, hoping that he would be cured of his madness. Unfortunately, his doctor was really a disguised psycho man who was using his position to try and brainwash insane people into doing his bidding. He took away the voices in Wade's head, but they were replaced by a new voice that was telling Deadpool to kill everyone. He became aware of his status as a fictional puppet and went on a killing spree of everyone in the Marvel Universe, both hero and villain alike. We get detailed accounts of how he kills the various characters in increasingly brutal and twisted ways, with some highlights being him taking out Thor by growing his hammer with Pym particles so that Thor is crushed underneath it, or trapping the X-Men in an insane death trap. But out of all the fates he subjects the various characters to, I think the worst is what he does to the characters with healing factors. Being a character with a powerful healing factor, Deadpool is uniquely qualified for taking out other such characters, and as Wolverine discovers when he walks into a trap, Deadpool has it all figured out. He has captured Daken and X-23 and left them suspended with a computer-controlled flamethrower. The computer keeps track of their vitals, and every time they come back to life and begin to regenerate, the flamethrowers go off and reduce them to skeletons again. So they are trapped in a continuous cycle of being burnt to death, barely coming back to life, and then immediately being burnt to death again, forever. Number 10. Reverse Flash Brain Scramble. Reverse Flash is one of the most brutal villains in the DC universe, with his unhinged psychopathy, prompting him to end people's lives in incredibly disturbing ways, sometimes going back in time to prevent people from ever having even been born, and other times using his incredible speed to turn himself into a lethal weapon. In the Flash TV show, we've seen him vibrate his hand and use it to stop people's hearts, but in the classic comics, he used a similar but slightly different method on the Flash's wife. Over the course of their many battles, the hatred between Reverse Flash and the Flash grew exponentially, but while this was occurring, Reverse Flash was also falling in love with Barry's wife, Iris. He came into their home when Barry was away and proposed to Iris, who said no, because she loved her husband, and also because Reverse Flash is a crazy psycho. Reverse Flash got his revenge by sneaking into a costume party where everyone was dressed as superheroes, and he murdered Iris, who was dressed as Batgirl, by vibrating his hand so that it could pass through her skull and scramble her brain. There are certainly more painful ways to go, but the speed of this death is what makes it so bad. One moment you're at a party with your whole life ahead of you, and the next your brain has been torn apart at super speed and you're just gone. Number 9. Jason Todd's death. Jason Todd has had a pretty rough life. He was an orphan living on the streets before one fateful day he attempted to steal the tires off of the Batmobile in Crime Alley. Batman caught him in the act and decided that the best way to help the boy handle his rage was to give him an outlet, training him to be the second Robin after Dick Grayson left to become Nightwing. Things were looking up. Jason eventually discovered that his birth mother was still alive and set out to find her. He eventually found Dr. Sheila Haywood working in a refugee camp in Iran, but discovered that she was being blackmailed by the Joker into letting him steal important supplies. He offered to help his mother, revealing that he was the Boy Wonder, and she led him to a warehouse. Once there, Jason realized that his mother had led him into a trap as she was embezzling hospital funds and felt that if Robin was allowed to live, her operation would be at risk. She turned him over to the Joker, who beat him nearly to death with a crowbar and then left him in the building, which was rigged to explode. So, Jason found his real mother, was almost immediately betrayed by her, beaten up by a homicidal clown, and then blown up. He eventually returned from the dead, but that doesn't change the fact that this was a rough way to go. Number 8. Gentleman Ghost's Unending Torment. Jim Craddock was a highwayman in the 1800s who came to America from England and began being known as Gentleman Jim. He crossed paths with the famous gunslingers Nighthawk and Cinnamon, and although Jim was a criminal, Nighthawk mistakenly believed that he had committed a crime against his wife. As a result, Nighthawk executed Jim in cold blood. Jim came back as a ghost, doomed to wander the earth until he could get his revenge and end the lives of his executioners. Unfortunately for the Gentleman Ghost, his executioners are one of the many reincarnations of Hawkman and Hawkgirl, who are always reborn anew whenever they die. Therefore, there is no way for Gentleman Ghost to fulfill his curse, and he is doomed to never enter the afterlife, having been a ghost for hundreds of years. Now, getting executed for a crime you didn't do is bad enough. Becoming a ghost who can't move on to the next life until he has revenge is worse. But finding out that the people you have to get revenge against are unable to stay dead, therefore making your entire curse unfulfillable, is a whole other level of awful. Number 7. Infected by the Carrier. Appearing in the Batman Journey into Night miniseries from 2005, the Carrier is a villain who was infected with a deadly disease while searching for treasure in a cave. He survived, but as a result, he became deadly to anyone who so much as breathed the same air as him. Anyone who came into contact with him would begin going through painful contractions as they struggled to breathe and began forming large infected pustules and foaming green gunk out of their mouths. Carrier eventually discovered that he could prevent this by wearing a gas mask with reversed filters and set upon a quest for revenge against the man who sold him the bogus treasure map. Huge amounts of people died as a result of Carrier coming to Gotham, and the speed at which they were infected, symptomatic, and finally dead was a horrifying way for anyone unfortunate to cross paths with the Carrier to go. Number 6. Death by Rorschach. The characters featured in Alan Moore's Watchmen are extremely brutal with their enemies, with one of the most aggressive of the vigilantes being Walter Kovacs, aka Rorschach. Rorschach is known for ending the lives of his enemies in increasingly brutal ways. In the book, we are told one enemy got dropped down an elevator shaft. In a flashback, we see him handcuff a man in a burning house, giving him a hacksaw so he would spend his last moments trying to remove his own hand. And in issue 8, Rorschach electrocutes a man and drowns another with a toilet. I think the most painful method that we see the character use in the story is in issue number 6, when he is in prison. One of the other prisoners approaches him in the cafeteria line, tries to use a shiv against the imprisoned vigilante. Rorschach responds by grabbing a tray of boiling oil and throwing it in the prisoner's face. The man is horrifically burned as Rorschach is dragged away, reminding the various prisoners that he isn't locked up with them, they're locked up with him. The burned man spends days in the prison hospital in excruciating pain before he finally passes away from his injuries. Number 5. Abattoir's family drama. Abattoir was a Gotham villain who believed that by ending the lives of his family members, he could absorb their life forces and become immortal. He went about destroying his family tree, but was frequently thwarted by Batman. During the Nightfall arc, where Bruce Wayne was out of commission due to a broken spine, and Jean-Paul Valley was the new Batman, Abattoir went after the last living member of his family, Graham Etchison. He put Graham in an elaborate death trap designed to cause Graham as much pain as possible before his death. He put Graham on a bed of nails with a special rig set up that would drop a weight on him every hour or so. With every new weight, Graham would sink deeper into the nails until he would eventually die after several hours. The new Batman went after Abattoir, but was more concerned with punishing evil than he was with protecting innocent lives, and let the villain fall into a vat of molten steel. As a result, Abattoir was unable to lead Jean-Paul to Graham, and he died a slow and painful death. Number 4. Mr. Hyde plays Hyde the Jekyll with the Invisible Man. Another Alan Moore series known for its dark themes and extreme violence is The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. In it, characters from classic literature come together to form a team. One of the members of the team is Holly Griffin, otherwise known as the Invisible Man. He is a twisted monster of a man who uses his abilities to have his way with unsuspecting women, and in volume 2 of the series, he takes his lack of morality to new levels. When Martians invade the Earth, he realizes that there is no way for humanity to win the War of the Worlds, and decides to save his own skin by making a deal with the invaders to betray humanity in exchange for being allowed to rule the planet alongside them. He also attacks his teammate Mina Murray, thus earning the ire of another of his teammates, Edward Hyde. In the League universe, Edward Hyde is kind of similar to the Hulk, being incredibly strong and about 3 times his usual size. So, in issue 5 of volume 2, he decided to use his size to his advantage, beating and pinning down the Invisible Man. He then spent hours brutally, well, you know, over and over until the Invisible Man died. His remains becoming visible only once he had fully expired after hours of pain and humiliation at Hyde's hands. Number 3. Miss Arrow. When Spider-Man was killed by Morlun in the Others event, his body was put in a cocoon under the Brooklyn Bridge until he returned to life. He shed his skin, and this skin was taken over by a bunch of spiders, who formed a being called Arrow, who was intent on killing Spider-Man once and for all. Arrow began going by Miss Arrow, and she tried to impregnate Flash Thompson with an egg sac that would give birth to thousands of her offspring, but was stopped by a shotgun-wielding Betty Brant. Miss Arrow tried to escape, but Spider-Man pursued her, eventually managing to force her into the Central Park Zoo's aviary. The various exotic birds were thrilled with the group of spiders before them, and went about eating Miss Arrow one spider at a time as she thrashed and screamed. The birds ate almost every spider, leaving only one left, which Spider-Man promptly stepped on. Number 2. Anything involving the Spectre. The Spirit of Vengeance in the DC universe first appeared in More Fun Comics number 52. He was originally a demon named Aztar, who was helping Lucifer try and take control of heaven. He eventually had a change of heart and surrendered to the Archangel Michael. As a means of atonement, his memory and consciousness were wiped, and he was transformed into the Spectre. He is divinely powered, being capable of almost anything he can imagine, can travel between dimensions, and can shoot energy blasts. He's immortal and capable of flight, intangibility, possession, telepathy, and telekinesis, just to name a few of his powers. In order to temper this power, he must be bonded to a human host, with this most often being Jim Corrigan. Spectre has no limit to his power, but is bound by the morality of his host, who often prevents him from unleashing the full wrath of God upon his enemies. He is known for subjecting his victims to fates worse than death, before eventually subjecting them to death as well. Over his years in the comics, he has used some strange and disturbing methods to dispatch his enemies, such as aging them to death, melting them, cutting them in half with a giant pair of scissors, turning a man into a sentient and feeling mannequin who is then dumped in a fire and painfully burnt, turning a bunch of junkies into his fingertips and then injecting them with liquid fire, or in one extreme case, burning down an entire country. Number 1. The Omega Sanction. The villain Darkseid is perhaps the most evil being in the DC universe, being a frequent foe of the Justice League. Sure, he might destroy you with his incredible strength, or even with the use of his Omega beams, which are essentially deadly energy beams that always find their target, usually reducing the victim to ash. That's bad, but it could be worse if Darkseid instead used the Omega Sanction. The Omega Sanction traps you in an endless series of lives, each one more painful and awful than the last. So, you don't just die a horrible death, you die horrible death after horrible death without respite forever. It doesn't get much worse than that.
Alright, kicking off the list at number 10 is Robin. Why not kick off this list at the beginning? The inciting incident for our protagonist. In both the show and the comic book, we pick up with Huey Campbell, who isn't exactly the pillar of his community, when he is out and about with his girlfriend, Robin. In the show, Huey and Robin are walking along the street when Robin accidentally winds up on the street and gives Huey a kiss. In the comic, Huey and Robin are at a fair when they share their kiss and are all lovey and giddy and all that good romantic stuff. But in both instances, the happy moment is brought to an incredibly abrupt end when Robin is completely obliterated thanks to the superhero known as A-Train. For the show, A-Train himself runs straight through Robin, causing both him and Huey to be completely covered in Robin soup. In the comic, A-Train and a supervillain were doing some super speed battle when the villain was rammed straight into Robin and then a brick wall, moving at about Mach 3. In both instances, Huey is left hanging onto Robin's detached forearms. At least it was quick.
Number 9. Disfigured and discarded. I think one of the worst ways to go in the comics is actually Vicor's implied death. Although we don't see it on panel, the soup known as Mighty Warrior is used by Butcher to gain information on the Scorchers. How does Butcher convince Vicor to join him? By visiting him at his wife Norska's funeral and throwing him into the cremation oven next to her remains. While left horribly disfigured by this incident right afterwards, Vicor surprisingly survives thanks to his superhuman durability and even manages to heal most of his face. In the end, once Butcher has no more use of him, it's implied that he basically takes Mighty Warrior out to the forest in the guise of a secret meeting to dispose of him. Brutal. I just can't believe that Butcher did this at, Mighty Warrior's wife's funeral. Like, I know Vicor wasn't too broken up about it because of what happens in that comic, or at least, he seemed to move on pretty quickly, but still. Then again, this is Butcher, so I guess I shouldn't be too surprised.
Number 8. Head Pop. In The Boys TV show, there is a character named Victoria Nadia Newman, who becomes a pretty major antagonist, whereas the character she is based on, Victor Newman, in the comics, is just the guy who becomes vice president. The thing about Victoria, unlike Victor, is she is actually, spoiler alert, a soup, with the inflexible ability to make people's heads completely pop in a small explosion of disgustingness. Using this ability, she has been able to take out Susan Rayner, Jonah Vogelbaum, Alastair Adana, and several other members of Congress. Now, just like Robin, at least this is quick, but it's not exactly a demise I would wish on anyone. I can't imagine the pain of having your head explode would be light, and because it's so quick, the rest of your body would have to catch up to what just happened, and the idea of that is not sitting well with me in my tummy.
Number 7. Sneeze. Many of these for me are going to be from The Boys live action series because they're just so brutal and so visual, and I just love the live action series so much. Once you see a lot of these, it's hard to get them out of your head. Case in point, in season 3 of the show, when Peter, Termite's love interest, is killed. Termite shrinks down to do something that I probably can't talk about here on YouTube. Let's just say it's something Peter very much enjoys. However, during this intimate moment between them, while Termite is shrunk down and literally inside of Peter's body, Termite sneezes. This causes Termite to unintentionally lose control of his powers momentarily, which can happen when he sneezes, changing back to his normal size. Well, I think you can see where I'm going with this one. If you have also watched season 3, which I hope you have if you're watching this video, then I'm sure this was also a moment that forever stuck out in your mind.
Number 6. Pop Claw. This part is kind of twofold. A-Train in the show seems like one of the only redeemable members of the Seven, outside of Starlight obviously. Well, A-Train was once on a team called Teenage Kicks, with Pop Claw, a Wolverine-inspired soup, and his secret girlfriend. Pop Claw was involved in one of the show's most heinous deaths when she accidentally crushes her landlord with her legs while they were doing the deed, if you know what I mean. That one was pretty shocking to watch, but Pop Claw herself also suffered a pretty upsetting passing. Pop Claw has a pretty damaged reputation. A-Train was so insecure about this, especially in the eyes of Homelander, that when he saw her as a liability, he took her life by giving her a substance overdose. It was pretty horrible to watch and makes me wonder how the hell they are planning to redeem A-Train going forward. Also, it's very real.
Number 5. Biting your own tongue. Sounds like a weird way to put it, but that is in essence what happened to Stormfront in the end. Or at least what we were told happened to her. I'm pretty sure it's what happened, but you know. She took her own life by biting off her tongue. While I'm still a little skeptical of this, as you know, we don't see her body or the act in question, I do believe that Stormfront at this point was extremely depressed, and so it does make sense that she would, you know, take this out. And also, we do at least, you know, see where she was when it happened. She ends up dying on Homelander's birthday, which causes him to have a straight up diabolical reaction to a woman threatening to jump off a building, who throughout the course of their conversation basically changes her mind. He's supposed to save her because it's his birthday save. I personally think, although Stormfront seemed to deserve her death and that it definitely felt karmic to me, that this would still be a pretty terrible way to go.
Number 4. Duel on the Sun. But since I hate Thrag for taking the life of Battle Beast and for being a Freddie Mercury clone, let's talk about how his life came to a close. In the climactic battle between Mark Grayson, Invincible, and Thrag, who had been one of the primary antagonists through the series, Invincible had taken their fight to the very surface of the sun itself. These guys are so powerful that their fight actually goes on for some time, but once Mark forces the two of them into the sun, things really start to heat up. Pun intended. These two keep up their fight even as they're both burning and melting, breaking bones and taking chunks out of each other. The problem for Thrag is that Mark has allies. Thrag has no one. His only motivation is strength, and in the end, that strength failed him when Mark got help from one of Robot's suits that gave him just a few extra minutes of survival on the sun's surface. The slogfest finally came to an end when Mark took a bite out of Thrag's neck, leaving him to burn to nothingness on the sun, while Mark was saved by Alan the alien.
Number 3. Made to jump. Speaking of terrible deaths, while Stormfront's demise definitely sounds pretty bad, I think the woman who was there with Homelander when he heard about it, Chelsea, had it a lot worse. She was the one who was threatening to jump off a building when Homelander flew to her rescue. At first, his tactic was basically to convince her there was really no point of jumping because if Chelsea jumped, he'd just fly down and catch her before her body hit the pavement. Basically, it was all futile, he said, so she might as well just give it up. However, after learning of Stormfront's death, which by the way happens on Homelander's birthday, Homelander refuses to accept that Chelsea's life matters more than that of the woman he loved. And even when Chelsea begs to be let go and actually changes her mind, recanting on her initial conviction to jump, Homelander basically pushes her off the roof.
Alright, and at number 2, Homelander. Okay, so spoilers for The Boys comic book series, which finished in 2012. What was arguably the biggest twist of the comic came near the end of the story, in issue number 65 specifically. Luckily, this twist is not present in the show, so you don't need to worry about this, but it turns out that Black Noir is secretly a Homelander clone. He was created with the whole purpose of being meant to take Homelander down if he ever loses control. Problem is, Homelander enjoys being a puppet of Vought International, and that puts Homelander well in their good graces, so Homelander never ends up going rogue. This makes Black Noir incredibly frustrated, as he has been looking for the day when he'll finally fulfill his purpose of bringing down Homelander, only to never be given it for years and years and years. In the final issues of The Boys, after slowly watching Homelander get more and more insane, he finally snaps and attacks the White House, taking out the president. This finally opened up Black Noir to finally do what he was made to finally do, when he showed up to the White House in the climactic issue 65, revealing himself as a clone and then going for an absolute slogfest against the completely shocked Homelander. They ripped each other to shreds, but Black Noir came out on top, before he stepped out onto the front lawn missing significant chunks of his body. That is when the US military, alongside Billy Butcher, brought this insane soup to his brutal end with one final blow from Billy Butcher's crowbar and brain-crushing fist.
Number 1. Pulverized. I don't really know how else to describe what happened to Supersonic. He was the ex of Starlight, who was originally known by the name Drummer Boy, a member of the all-superhero band Super Sweet. He and Starlight once dated and were friends, as we saw during his time on American Hero. American Hero was basically a reality TV show that Vought used to recruit their newest member of the Seven after Stormfront was, of course, removed from the team. Alex, under the codename Supersonic, ended up winning and joined Starlight in a plot to basically try and take down Homelander. However, he made a mistake in trying to recruit A-Train to their side, who basically ratted out Alex and Annie to Homelander. As punishment, Homelander ended up killing Alex brutally, to the point that when he revealed Alex's corpse to Starlight, Alex was pretty much almost unrecognizable, save for his suit. His limbs and body were basically torn asunder, and his face was just pretty much gone.
Starting off at number 10 is Glenn. Kicking off this list today with one that hits close to home for most people. In both the TV show and the comic books, the former pizza delivery boy turned zombie fighter and scout, Glenn, was the one person in the group that believed there could be a future for them all, and he was easily one of people's most favorite characters, which unfortunately in this world means that he probably won't be around for too long. The worst part is that you have so much faith in this character and his future in the story. Maggie was pregnant with his child, and they were going to start a family as they wanted to rebuild society. Fortunately, the group leader Rick Grimes and his friends crossed a guy by the name of Negan, who led a group called, ironically, the Saviors. The group unwittingly incurred his wrath by taking out a lot of the Saviors that attacked the group. Since Rick had taken the lives of Negan's men, Negan came back in full force to get his revenge. But lining up the group of survivors, Negan made his choice at random. It was one of the most tense moments in the comic, and when he finally chose Glenn, bashing his head in with Lucille in front of his wife and friends, he not only proved that anyone in this world could die, but he proved that a comic book can make me cry and want to throw up all at the same time. Number 9, Nemesis. Now look, I'm not gonna say that Nemesis is a great comic book. It's disliked by a lot of people because it basically just relies on its shock and brutality factor, but gives a main character that isn't really likable at all and has a pretty lame plot. But it does rely on the brutality, which means yes, there are some horrible ways to pass into the afterlife presented here. Now disclaimer, the original was not published by Image Comics, so I won't be talking about that one. Instead, we will focus on Nemesis Reloaded, which was published by Image Comics. Anyways, in issue 3 of the Image comic, Nemesis tricks his way onto a police boat with a very specific officer on board. This officer was responsible for the arrest of Nemesis' parents. While they probably did deserve to be arrested because they were criminals, they also lost their lives, and for that, Nemesis wants revenge. So, after knocking out the officer, he comes back to find the boat is now sinking. Nemesis explains who he is and why this is happening, and then he waits as the boat sinks, and then is picked up by his henchmen. All the while, the officer sinks to his watery grave. No thank you. I'm good. I don't like that. Number 8, Headbutt. The oldest Viltrumites are usually the most powerful of the bunch. One old-timer Viltrumite goes by the name of Conquest, and he is one grizzled old man, battle-scarred with a cybernetic arm and breath that smells like feet. He arrives on Earth to check on Mark's progress with taking over the planet after the Invincible War, so it's safe to say Mark is not in the best mood. But Conquest does not care, and these two have an absolute slog of a battle over the course of 4 issues of the comic. Conquest takes a few hits, but Mark is no match for this guy in the slightest. In an attempt to help Invincible, his girl, Adam Eve, decides to show up on the battlefield and lend a hand. She was far out of her league, and Conquest punched a hole right through her. Actually, he didn't punch, he went like that. I don't know what to call that. That was a line for Mark though, and it sends him into a frenzy. The two Superman-like beings fly straight at one another, and Mark punches straight through Conquest's cybernetic arm, breaking his own arm in the process. He uses his unbroken hand to clock the old man across the face. He bites a massive chunk out of the guy's shoulder. Adam Eve, out of nowhere, revives herself and lends a helpful blast, and then when Conquest breaks Mark's other hand, Invincible uses his head and headbutts Conquest over and over and over and over and over again until what was once an old grizzled Viltrumite's face is now just ground beef. Number 7, Completely Obliterated. If you haven't heard of Image Comics' new series Vanish, allow me to introduce you. Vanish? Nerds. now you've met. Vanish follows Oliver Harrison. This chosen one peaked at the age of 14 when he took down the leader of the biggest threat to his universe in a mystical place called the Everkeep. Now, as an adult, this chosen one indulges in every vice he can, living a mediocre, sloppy life. Until a group of heroes show up called the Prestige, who are actually the followers of the threat that Oliver took down as a child. The leader of this group of heroes is called Halcyon, and just like the rest, he isn't what he actually seems. Trying to get to Oliver, Halcyon goes after Oliver's ex-best friend, another magic user by the name of Deacon Dust. But Deacon is loyal and refuses to give in to Halcyon no matter how much pain the hero inflicts on him. After launching a bloody ball of spit in Halcyon's face, Deacon is subsequently obliterated in an explosion of guts, innards, and 2 eyeballs. This is only issue 4, so I for one hope we get to see Deacon again, but after that, I don't think there's much chance. Number 6. Bit by a Walker. In the world of Robert Kirkman's The Walking Dead, other people are the most dangerous foe one can encounter. People with selfish motivations and with no kind of law and order to keep them in check will do the absolute worst things, but the whole reason that is the case in this story is because the rest of the world have been turned into a horde of undead. So many characters fall to the undead in these comics, and not a single one of those untimely demises looks like they'd be particularly great. For starters, you're having chunks ripped out of you by a walking corpse. That is terrifying. But in most cases, the walkers don't travel solo, which means that more often than not, you're being completely swarmed and torn apart by an entire herd of the Walking Dead. So that's all bad enough, but what if you get bit but manage to escape? Well, now you have to slowly and agonizingly succumb to the zombie infection, turning you into one of the undead and potentially forcing you to turn on your own friends. That's assuming you or one of your closest friends isn't around to put you out of your misery. There is a reason The Walking Dead caused the collapse of society in this Image Comics series. It's because they're scary. Number 5. Thrag vs. Battle Beast. The incredibly powerful and barbarian-like alien known as Thok, aka Battle Beast, fights for the good guys or the bad guys, as long as it serves his goal to find his equal and better in combat so that they can bring the end of his life in an honorable battle. Honor is the key part here. During his fight against Thrag, the unfathomably strong leader of the Viltrumites, Thok recognizes Thrag's strength and the two go at it. Now, the Coalition of Worlds organized the use of Ragnars, which are one of the only species of aliens who have proven strong enough to take down Viltrumites. Battle Beast was told that they would only be released if he failed to take down Thrag, so when they were released at the start of the battle and gave Thrag a massive wound, Battle Beast was actually incredibly peed, and he decided to stop fighting Thrag and instead help him defeat the Ragnars so that they could have a fair fight, which Thrag even remarks was a stupid thing to do. But not only did he take away his own advantage, but he even injured himself across the abdomen in the same way that Thrag had been injured, just so he wouldn't have any unfair advantages. These two absolute monsters fought for days until Thrag got the upper hand and crushed the heart of Thok after the honorable warrior thanked Thrag for the fight of his life. Literally. For Timothy. The Deep in the show is pretty much the most pathetic hero of the 7. He might not be as pure evil and maniacal as Homelander, but he's still done some incredibly horrible things that are not redeemable at all. The only thing close to being redeemable is his care for aquatic animal life, which is still uncomfortable because he has some really deep relationships with some of his aquatic life, pun intended. Anyways, like his relationship with Timothy the octopus. This relationship is brought to an incredibly bad end. Basically, Homelander forces the Deep to eat Timothy alive during a dinner with Ashley and his once upon a time wife, Cassandra. I believe it was Homelander trying to make Deep conform with the rest of humanity, which isn't really an excuse because Timothy was an innocent character, and as we know, octopi are incredibly smart. So to see Timothy killed off to show Homelander's cruelty and the Deep's cowardice was pretty horrific. The Deep slurping down his friend alive was made even worse when he said that Timothy was crying. It was all CGI, sure, and people love to eat octopus, but this is just awful. Number 3, Head Smushed. Saga is an awesome comic book out of Image Comics, and I just started reading it last week, and it's quickly becoming a favorite. In the comic, there are bounty hunters, mercenary types called freelancers. One of these freelancers goes by the name The Will, and he is hired to bring down the main characters for supposed crimes that they committed. The crime of being in love and making a baby together. But that's not important. The Will takes a trip to a lovely little place called Sextillion. If you didn't infer from the name of this place, it's essentially a whole colony in space that seems to have one purpose: pleasure. Oh, fair warning, this comic is not for kids. I should probably say that. Speaking of that though, the will gets picked up by a groomer. Basically a guy who is in charge of a handful of women and the one who kind of runs the organization. Well, he introduces the will to one of the girls that he thinks the will be interested in. For some very obvious reasons, the will is not interested in this girl and is actually incredibly angry that this girl is even being used like this. So the will introduces this groomer's head to the insides of his hands and completely destroys it. Gone in a flash. Good riddance, bye. Number 2, Crucified. I bet you were worried Spawn wasn't gonna make this list, didn't you? I wouldn't do that to you guys, come on. In Spawn number 27, we learn of Philip Cran, who has spent his life studying the occult so that one day he could gain access to heaven. Pretty sure that's not how it works, but hey. Calling himself the Curse, very cool, Philip decided the best thing to do in his heavenly endeavor would be to bring down the Hellspawn Al Simmons. Spawn was an agent of heaven at that point though, and was imbued with mystical energy, which Philip would then siphon off for himself. Because he is clearly no match for Spawn, Philip goes with a complete sneak attack on Simmons, blowing a hole clear through Spawn's chest. Unsurprisingly, Spawn wasn't especially pleased about being ambushed and made holy by this psycho. See what I did there? It was good. So he tracks down the Curse and blasts off his bionic arm. The two engage in a battle that began and ended pretty quickly though. Since Spawn was at full power and the Curse was just a crazy guy in a costume, he didn't last that long at all. Spawn beat the absolute beans out of the Curse and then strung up his almost lifeless body against a wall in an alley to warn off any further enemies. That would have resulted in Philip's passing, but his fate was actually even worse later on. But we're not going to talk about it. Number 1, Paul. Now that was pretty bad, but let's fast forward all the way to Spawn issue number 322. Essentially, there was this vampire named Paul, and he had taken a girl and had been keeping her in his house for years, where he would not only drain her, but do anything he wanted. Now look, Spawn is from hell, but there are some lines you just don't cross. Spawn's anger and rage at this guy seems to make him even more powerful, to the point that none of Paul's attempts to stop the Hellspawn even faze him a little bit, and he quickly incapacitates the vampire using a horrifying amount of bugs, but not before he tells Paul to say Monday. When Paul comes back to, he is chained up and Spawn makes him say Friday. Kinda weird, but that's because it has been 5 days since the vampire last fed. On top of that, Spawn had made some roaches go inside Paul and eat away at anything his body produced to help with his hunger, so this guy is starving. Spawn lets a mouse go free down a skinny little hallway and informs Paul that there is even more blood for him at the end of the hallway, and he can either go down that or stay where he is and be consumed by the roaches. Naturally, Paul chooses the hallway, but you see, Spawn had removed all the spikes from his costume and instead put them on either side of said hallway, so Paul has to basically be torn to pieces as he makes his way through, with the bugs chasing after every drop of Paul's blood that hits the ground. But he does it, and when he finally gets through, Spawn is there with Paul's mistreated dogs, who have also not eaten in 5 days. Spawn gives Paul the key to the exit, which is back on the other end of the hallway, so Paul is forced to go back through, pursued by ravenous dogs on one side and blood and flesh consuming insects on the other. Needless to say, Paul doesn't make it through. And that, dear nerds, is the end. It's been a blast. I'm Adam Andrews. Make sure you subscribe here at Top 10 Nerd, and I'll catch you all on the flippy flop. Peace!